The birthday surprise, Margaret Foster had always been the practical one in her family. At 62, she managed the town library, volunteered at the animal shelter, and maintained a garden that was the envy of Riverside, Colorado. So when her daughter Rebecca announced her birthday surprise, Margaret nearly choked on her morning coffee. Jetpack flying? Margaret set down her mug with trembling hands. Rebecca, honey, I think you've confused me with someone half my age and twice as adventurous. Rebecca grinned, her eyes sparkling with mischief inherited directly from her mother, though Margaret rarely acknowledged that particular trait. Mom, you've spent your entire life playing it safe. Dad always said you had a wild side buried under all that sensibility. The mention of David made Margaret's chest tighten. Her husband of 37 years had passed 2 years ago, leaving behind memories of unfulfilled promises to travel, to take risks, to live boldly. He'd always joked that he'd married a librarian who secretly dreamed of being a pilot. Besides, Rebecca continued, pulling out her tablet to show professional photos of people soaring through mountain valleys, it's perfectly safe. Rocky Mountain Adventure Sports has an impeccable safety record. Their head instructor, Marcus Rodriguez, used to be a Navy SEAL. He's trained everyone from Hollywood stunt people to nervous grandmothers. Margaret studied the images, her practical mind cataloging all the ways this could go wrong, while something deeper, something she'd kept carefully locked away, whispered about the freedom of flight. The jetpack looked like something from a science fiction movie, sleek, powerful, almost alien in its advanced design. The appointment is tomorrow, Rebecca said softly. I've already paid the deposit. But if you really don't want to tomorrow? Margaret's voice climbed an octave. Rebecca, you can't just spring something like this on me. I need time to research, to prepare, to make sure my insurance covers experimental aviation activities. Mom? Rebecca reached across the kitchen table and took her mother's hands. When was the last time you did something just because it excited you? Not because it was practical or safe or expected, but because it made your heart race. Margaret wanted to protest, to list all the reasonable objections, but David's voice echoed in her memory. Maggie, promise me you'll try something that scares you at least once. She'd made that promise on his deathbed, then promptly buried it under grocery lists and library schedules. What if I panic? Margaret asked quietly. Then you'll panic while flying through the most beautiful scenery in Colorado, Rebecca replied. Mom, you raised 3 kids, survived Dad's midlife crisis motorcycle phase, and single-handedly organized 15 years of town festivals. You can handle 10 minutes of jetpack flight. Margaret looked at the photos again, imagining herself among those soaring figures. For the first time in 2 years, she felt something besides the comfortable numbness of routine. 10 minutes? She asked. Rebecca's smile could have powered the entire town. Just 10 minutes, Mom. What's the worst that could happen? Meeting the instructor, the Rocky Mountain Adventure Sports facility looked like a cross between a military hangar and a high-tech laboratory. Margaret parked her sensible Honda Civic between a lifted pickup truck and a motorcycle, already feeling out of place. Her palms were sweating despite the cool morning air at 8,000 feet elevation. You must be Margaret, said a voice behind her. She turned to see a man in his 40s approaching, his dark hair graying at the temples, wearing a confident smile and a jumpsuit that looked like it had seen serious action. I'm Marcus Rodriguez, your instructor for today. Margaret had expected someone younger, more reckless. Marcus had kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of experience rather than bravado. He stood with the relaxed posture of someone completely comfortable with controlled danger. I have to be honest. Mr. Rodriguez, Margaret said, her librarian instincts demanding full disclosure. I've never done anything like this. I don't even like roller coasters. My daughter thinks this will somehow honor my late husband's memory, but I'm starting to think she's trying to give me a heart attack instead. Marcus chuckled, a warm sound that eased some of her tension. Please call me Marcus. And Mrs. Foster, I've been doing this for 8 years. I've flown with everyone from 20-year-old adrenaline junkies to 85-year-old great-grandmothers. The scared ones are often my best students because they listen carefully. He gestured toward the facility. Would you like to see the equipment first? Understanding how everything works usually helps with the nerves. Inside, the hangar was filled with jetpacks in various stages of maintenance. Technicians moved between them with the focused efficiency of pit crews. The devices looked less intimidating, up-close complex. Yes. But engineered with obvious care for safety. This is what you'll be wearing, Marcus said, indicating a sleek pack with multiple redundant systems clearly labeled twin-turbine engines, computer-controlled stability systems, and more backup safety features than a space shuttle. The computers do most of the work. You're really just along for the ride. Margaret ran her fingers along the carbon fiber housing. It's lighter than I expected, 38 pounds total. But the harness distributes the weight across your entire torso. You'll barely feel it once we're airborne. Marcus picked up a helmet with a built-in communication system. We'll be in constant contact. I'll be right beside you the entire time, and I can override your controls if necessary. Has that ever been necessary? Margaret asked. Twice in 8 years, Marcus replied honestly. Both times with overconfident young men who ignored instructions. The computers prevented any actual danger. But it reinforced why I insist on careful briefings. They moved to a classroom area where Marcus walked her through basic controls, emergency procedures, and flight physics. His teaching style was patient and thorough, treating her questions with respect rather than condescension. The key, he explained, is trusting the technology in your training. These packs are designed to keep you stable and safe. Your job is to enjoy the experience and make small adjustments for direction. Margaret found herself relaxing as her understanding grew. This wasn't reckless adventure. It was carefully engineered flight with multiple safety nets. Ready for the practical portion? Marcus asked. Margaret thought of David, of promises made and broken, of a life lived cautiously. She thought of Rebecca's hopeful smile and her own secret dreams. Ready? She said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. First flight, the launch platform overlooked a spectacular valley carved by ancient glaciers, with golden aspen groves painting the mountainsides in autumn splendor. Margaret stood in her flight harness, the jetpack's gentle hum somehow both reassuring and terrifying. The safety briefing had covered every possible scenario, but now, facing the vast expanse of air, theory felt inadequate. Remember? Marcus said through the comm system. His own pack secured and ready. The computer handles stability. You just think about where you want to go. Make gentle adjustments with the hand controls, and trust the process. We'll start with a simple hover, then progress to basic movement. Rebecca stood behind the safety barrier with her phone ready, her face a mixture of pride and worry. Margaret gave her a thumbs up, hoping her daughter couldn't see her hands shaking. On my count, Marcus said. 3, 2, 1, ignition. The world changed. One moment, Margaret was standing on solid titanium decking. The next, she was floating 3 feet above it, suspended by controlled thrust and technological magic. The sensation was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, not the stomach-dropping terror of falling, but a strange liberation from gravity's constant pull. How does it feel? Marcus asked, hovering nearby with the casual ease of a bird. Impossible, Margaret breathed, then laughed as she realized she was actually flying. David would never believe this. They practiced basic movements for several minutes forward, backward, gentle turns. Margaret discovered that the key was relaxation rather than rigid control. The more she fought the system, the more unstable she became. When she trusted the technology and moved naturally, the jetpack responded like an extension of her body, ready to see the valley. Marcus asked. Margaret looked down at the platform already 30 feet below, then out at the magnificent wilderness stretching to the horizon. Fear and wonder battled in her chest, its wonder winning by the narrowest margin. Lead the way, she said. They flew out over the valley at a sedate pace, the landscape unfolding beneath them like a living map. Margaret could see elk grazing in distant meadows, a hawk circling thermals far below them, and mountain peaks stretching toward a sky so blue it seemed artificial. This is what you're missing from ground level, Marcus said. banking gently around a rock formation that jutted from the valley wall like a cathedral spire. The world looks completely different from up here. Margaret followed his movements, confidence growing with each successful maneuver. The 10-minute flight that had seemed like an eternity of terror now felt impossibly brief. She wanted to see more, to fly higher, to push against boundaries she'd accepted without question for 62 years. "Time to head back," Marcus announced as they approached the platform. "Already?" The disappointment in her voice surprised them both. "Already," Marcus confirmed. But his tone suggested he'd heard that response before. "Landing is just like takeoff in reverse. The platform will guide us in automatically." As they touched down, Margaret felt the weight of gravity reassert itself. But something had fundamentally changed. She'd been airborne for exactly 11 minutes and 37 seconds, according to the flight computer. But those minutes had rewritten something essential about what she believed possible. Rebecca rushed over as soon as the safety officer cleared the platform. Her phone camera still recording. "Mom, you were flying. How was it? Are you okay? Do you want to go again?" Margaret looked at her daughter, then back at the valley where she'd just spent 11 minutes as something other than a cautious librarian. "When can I book the next session?" she asked Marcus. The unexpected revelation 3 weeks later, Margaret was back at the facility for her 4th flight. What had started as a one-time birthday adventure had become something approaching obsession. She'd researched jetpack technology, watched flight videos online, and even bought aviation magazines behavior that would have seemed impossible a month ago. Marcus greeted her with the easy familiarity of shared sky time. "Ready for something new today? I thought we might try some altitude work if you're feeling confident." Margaret had progressed from tentative hovering to smooth valley tours, her natural caution proving advantageous once she'd committed to the experience. She followed instructions precisely, never pushing beyond agreed parameters. But within those boundaries, she flew with increasing grace. "How high?" she asked, already knowing she'd agree regardless of the answer. 12,000 feet. "We'll catch the mountain thermals, see the whole range spread out below us. It's what got me addicted to this job." They launched into a perfect autumn morning, the air crisp and clear with visibility stretching to the distant plains. As they climbed above the familiar valley, Margaret felt the addictive rush of expanding horizons. Each flight revealed new perspectives, new possibilities she'd never imagined. At altitude, with the Colorado Rockies extending in every direction, Marcus's voice came through the cum with unusual hesitancy. "Margaret, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," she replied, adjusting her position to catch a thermal updraft, the way he'd taught. Your daughter mentioned you'd lost your husband recently. I'm sorry for your loss, but I have to know why this. Why now? In 8 years of instruction, I've never seen anyone your age take to flying like you have." Margaret considered the question while soaring above peaks, that had witnessed centuries of human dreams and failures. Below, the world looked manageable, its problems reduced to geography and weather patterns. "David and I met in college," she began, her voice steady despite the personal nature of the confession. "He was studying engineering. I was in library science. He used to joke that he'd married the most cautious woman in Colorado, but he saw something in me that I'd forgotten was there." She executed a gentle banking turn around a cloud formation, the movement now automatic. "For 37 years, he encouraged me to take risks I was too scared to take. Skydiving, traveling to unusual places, learning to fly. He had a pilot's license, you know? I was always too afraid, too practical, too concerned about what could go wrong." Marcus flew alongside her, listening without interruption as they rode the mountain thermals. 2 years ago, when he was dying, he made me promise I'd try something that scared me. Something that would help me understand what I'd been afraid of all those years. Margaret's voice caught slightly. "I think he knew I'd been living in a cage of my own making." Choosing security over experience, they flew in companionable silence for several minutes. 2 humans suspended between earth and sky, sharing the peculiar intimacy that develops between instructor and student when the classroom is 3 miles above ground. There's something else, Marcus said finally. Something I probably should have mentioned earlier. The tone in his voice made Margaret's attention sharpen. What? Your husband? David Foster. He contacted me about 6 months before he passed away. He wanted to book a flight for his wife's birthday. Said she'd always been afraid of flying, but he thought she might surprise herself. Margaret's breath caught. The implications hit her like the mountain wind. David had planned this. Had seen her potential even while fighting his final illness. He paid for 5 flights in advance. Marcus continued quietly. Said he wouldn't be there to encourage you. But maybe the sky would do what he couldn't. Suspended between the peaks where David had dreamed of flying with her, Margaret finally understood the gift he'd left behind. Soaring beyond fear 6 months after her first flight. Margaret stood before a gathering at the Riverside Community Center, facing an audience she never would have imagined addressing. The local newspaper had written a feature story about the 62-year-old librarian who'd discovered flight, and speaking requests had followed. Fear, she began. Her voice steady, despite the butterflies that had nothing to do with altitude, is not the opposite of courage. Fear is information. It tells us something might be dangerous, but it doesn't tell us whether that danger is worth facing. In the audience, Rebecca beamed with pride, while Margaret's library colleagues looked shell-shocked. This was not the quiet, predictable woman who'd run the reference desk for 15 years. Margaret clicked to a slide showing herself and Marcus is in flight gear, mountain peaks spread beyond them like a landscape of possibilities. David used to say I collected safety like other people collect stamps. I had safety in my job, my routines, my carefully managed life. What I didn't have was the experience that comes from testing those boundaries. She advanced to video footage from her latest flight, showing her executing complex maneuvers at altitude, her movements confident and precise. This is my 23rd flight. Marcus says I'm ready for advanced certification, which means I could eventually become an instructor myself. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Margaret Foster, instructor? The woman who'd needed 3 committee meetings to approve new library carpet? The equipment didn't make me brave, Margaret continued. Understanding the equipment gave me permission to discover I'd been brave all along. David saw that in me when I couldn't see it in myself. After her talk, people approached with questions and congratulations. An elderly man named Frank mentioned he'd always wanted to try parasailing. A middle-aged woman named Janet confessed she'd dreamed of learning to rock climb but thought she was too old to start. Margaret exchanged contact information, promised to research instructors, and found herself accidentally building a community of people ready to challenge their own assumptions about age and capability. Later that evening, Rebecca helped her load gift boxes into her car requests from other families wanting to give adventurous experiences to reluctant relatives. Dad would be so proud, Rebecca said. Hugging her mother goodbye. He is proud, Margaret replied with quiet certainty. Every time I fly, I feel him up there with me. Finally getting his cautious wife to see the world from his perspective, the next morning brought a call that would change everything again. Marcus's voice carried barely contained excitement. Margaret, how do you feel about television interviews? There's a national morning show that wants to do a segment about people discovering adventure later in life. They specifically want to interview you. Margaret looked out her kitchen window at the mountains where she'd learned to fly. Where David's final gift had taught her the difference between existing and living. 6 months ago, the thought of national television would have sent her into a panic spiral. Now it simply represented another form of altitude. When do they want to film? She asked. 3 days later, Margaret stood on the launch platform while cameras rolled. Marcus beside her as they prepared for their most watched flight ever. The morning show host had expressed amazement at her transformation, struggling to reconcile the confident aviator with the librarian they'd initially contacted. Any final thoughts before you take flight? The reporter asked. Margaret looked directly into the camera, thinking of David. Of all the people watching who might be living in their own carefully constructed cages, fear tells us we might fail, she said. But it doesn't tell us what we might become if we succeed. The sky doesn't care how old you are or how scared you've been. It only cares whether you're brave enough to trust yourself in the space between Earth and heaven. She ignited her pack and rose into the Colorado morning, leaving everyone speechless, not because she could fly, but because she'd finally learned to soar beyond the boundaries of a life lived small. Below, cameras captured her silhouette against the peaks. But they couldn't capture the most important thing: the moment when someone chooses to become who they've always had the potential to be.